Have you ever encountered a woman whose presence seemed to transform the very energy of a room without her saying a word or drawing attention to herself? That quiet yet undeniable power that emanates from certain women who appear to possess an inner compass pointing toward their own truth, regardless of external validation or recognition. Most of us move through life seeking approval in the visible realm, constantly adjusting our behavior to align with what others expect of us or what society has deemed acceptable. We rarely pause to consider what Kant might call the noumenal dimension of our existence, that aspect of reality that exists beyond sensory perception and yet forms the true foundation of who we are. Many find Kant's philosophy impenetrable, a labyrinth of abstract concepts seemingly disconnected from lived experience, particularly when it comes to understanding feminine power in a world that has historically valued visible, measurable forms of strength. The categorical imperative, transcendental idealism, the thing in itself, these phrases often create an immediate intellectual barrier, suggesting that true philosophical understanding is reserved for academics, rather than those seeking practical wisdom for navigating real-life challenges. Perhaps you've felt that particular emptiness that comes from realizing how little our educational systems have prepared us to think deeply about the invisible dimensions of human experience, especially those unique to women's lived realities. By the end of our exploration today, you'll not only understand how Kantian philosophy illuminates the nature of feminine power that manifests from within, but you'll also possess a framework for recognizing and cultivating that power in your own life. The insights we're about to explore won't merely expand your intellectual understanding, they will fundamentally transform how you perceive your own capacity for autonomous action in a world that often misinterprets or undervalues feminine modes of being. There is an urgency to this understanding, particularly in our current moment when superficial metrics of success and influence dominate our social landscape, leaving many women feeling that their deepest strengths remain unseen and unacknowledged. Join me as we embark on this journey to discover how Kant's revolutionary ideas about human dignity, autonomy, and the moral law within can help us recognize and honor the archetype of invisible feminine strength that has sustained humanity through its darkest moments. When Kant wrote his groundwork of the metaphysics of morals in 1785, he could scarcely have imagined how his conception of human dignity would one day speak to the particular struggles of women navigating patriarchal systems while maintaining their internal coherence and moral authority. At the heart of Kant's moral philosophy lies a revolutionary idea that human beings possess an inherent worth that transcends utility, appearance, or social position. This worth derives not from what we can produce or how we are perceived, but from our capacity for autonomous moral action, our ability to give ourselves the law rather than merely following external dictates. When we observe women who shine from within, we are witnessing this Kantian principle, embodied often without explicit philosophical framing. These are women who have, through circumstance or conscious development, come to recognize that their value exists independently of the conventional metrics by which feminine worth has traditionally been measured. They have discovered what Kant called the moral law within, and have oriented their lives around this internal compass rather than the fluctuating demands of external validation. Consider for a moment how differently the world appears when viewed through this Kantian lens. The woman who has accessed this understanding no longer experiences herself primarily as an object of perception whose value depends upon appearance, agreeableness, or conformity to expectations. Instead, she recognizes herself as a subject, an autonomous being capable of determining her own moral principles and acting in accordance with them. This transformation is not merely psychological. It represents a fundamental ontological shift, a different way of being in the world that manifests as that subtle yet palpable quality we recognize as inner radiance or authentic presence. This is not about adopting a particular personality type or exhibiting specific behaviors. Rather, it is about establishing a relationship with oneself that honors one's status as what Kant called an end in itself, rather than merely a means to others' ends. The invisible strength of such women derives precisely from their recognition that true autonomy involves giving oneself the moral law, rather than either blindly following convention or reacting against it. In Kantian terms, heteronomy, or allowing oneself to be governed by external forces, inclinations, or authorities, represents a failure to fulfill our human potential for self-governance. The woman who shines from within has recognized that both slavish conformity to patriarchal expectations and reactive rebellion against them can represent forms of heteronomy, ways of allowing external forces to determine one's course rather than acting from one's own rational will. Instead, she has developed what Kant might recognize as a fully autonomous orientation to the world, one in which her actions spring from principles she has determined to be universally valid through the exercise of her own reason. I want to pause here and ask you directly, how many times have you felt lost trying to connect Kant's philosophical concepts with your own existence as a woman in today's world? That feeling that there's something profound to be understood about feminine strength that somehow remains just beyond your reach. You're not alone. Many of us carry this quiet restlessness, this desire to truly understand the fundamental questions about feminine power that Kant's framework might illuminate when properly applied. I'd love for you to share your experience in the comments. Something as simple as, "My greatest challenge in understanding feminine strength through philosophy is Yam." Your comment not only helps me create content more directly addressing your real needs, but also creates a community where others facing similar obstacles might feel understood and less alone in their philosophical journey. It's through this honest exchange that we grow together. So please, pause the video for a moment and share your experience. Your voice matters more than you might imagine. What does it mean, in practical terms, to manifest the archetype of invisible feminine strength through a Kantian framework? First, it requires developing what Kant called practical reason, the capacity to determine for oneself what ought to be done independently of inclination or external pressure. For women who have been socialized to prioritize others' needs and perceptions, cultivating this faculty often involves a particular kind of courage, the courage to trust one's own moral intuitions even when they contradict conventional wisdom or social expectations. Second, it involves applying the categorical imperative, Kant's supreme principle of morality, which instructs us to act only according to that maxim, whereby you can, at the same time, will that it should become a universal law. Women who shine from within have often internalized this principle, not as an abstract philosophical formula, but as a lived practice of integrity. They ask themselves not, "What will make others happy?" or "What will advance my personal interests?" but rather, "What principle of action could I endorse as valid for all rational beings in similar circumstances?" The distinction between acting from duty and acting in conformity with duty is crucial to understanding the particular quality of authentic feminine strength. Kant observed that many actions which appear moral on the surface are performed not from duty, from recognition of the moral law and respect for it, but from inclination, sentiment, or self-interest. The shopkeeper who gives correct change not because it is right, but because it is good for business is acting in conformity with duty, but not from duty. Similarly, a woman might perform acts of care, maintain peace in relationships, or suppress her own desires not from an autonomous recognition of moral duty, but from fear, habit, or the desire to be liked. The woman who has accessed the archetype of invisible strength, however, performs these same actions differently. Her acts of care spring not from socialized feminine selflessness or fear of disapproval, but from a clear recognition of others' status as ends in themselves, as beings possessing inherent dignity requiring respect. The distinction may be invisible to observers, but it is transformative for the woman herself, for it places her in an entirely different relationship to her own actions. This brings us to Kant's concept of the kingdom of ends, his vision of an ideal moral community in which each rational being is treated never merely as a means, but always also as an end. Women who manifest invisible strength are often quietly building this kingdom through their daily interactions, creating spaces in which people are valued for their inherent dignity rather than their utility or conformity. They do this not by dominating or controlling others, but by steadfastly refusing to participate in systems of valuation that reduce human beings to their usefulness. This refusal is itself a form of strength that operates not through opposition or force, but through the persistent embodiment of an alternative way of being. It manifests as a quality of presence that invites others to recognize their own dignity and capacity for moral autonomy. The connection between Kant's transcendental idealism and the particular quality of feminine wisdom deserves exploration. Kant proposed a revolutionary distinction between phenomena, things as they appear to us through our sensory and cognitive apparatus, and noumena, things as they exist in themselves beyond our perception. This distinction creates space for recognizing forms of reality that transcend the immediately visible or measurable, a philosophical move that resonates deeply with women's lived experience of possessing forms of knowledge and strength that often go unrecognized in systems designed to value only what can be quantified and controlled. Women who shine from within have often developed a relationship with this noumenal dimension of existence, a capacity to sense and respond to aspects of reality that exist beyond conventional metrics of success or influence. This is not mysticism, but a pragmatic recognition that the most significant dimensions of human experience, including love, dignity, and moral worth, cannot be reduced to their visible manifestations. The concept of feminine strength operating invisibly raises important questions about recognition and social change. If true strength manifests in ways that are not immediately legible within dominant systems of valuation, how can it transform those very systems? This question points toward the subtle yet profound revolutionary potential in Kant's moral philosophy. By locating moral authority within the individual rational will, rather than in external sources such as tradition, authority figures, or social consensus, Kant's ethics provides a philosophical foundation for forms of resistance that operate not through direct confrontation, but through the cultivation of alternative forms of valuation. Women who embody this approach do not primarily seek to overthrow external systems of power, but to render them increasingly irrelevant by creating and embodying modes of being that honor human dignity in all its forms. This invisible strength has sustained women through centuries of formal exclusion from institutions of power, enabling them to maintain their moral authority and sense of purpose, even when denied external recognition or validation. It represents not a concession to powerlessness, but a sophisticated engagement with power that recognizes how true transformation occurs, not primarily through the redistribution of existing forms of authority, but through the cultivation of entirely different conceptions of what authority means and how it properly operates. The woman who has accessed this understanding recognizes that she need not wait for external permission to live according to principles she has determined to be valid through her own exercise of reason. This autonomy creates a particular quality of presence that others experience as a form of authority that derives not from position or force, but from authenticity and moral clarity. The relationship between invisible feminine strength and Kant's conception of enlightenment merits particular attention. In his famous essay, What is Enlightenment?, Kant defined this state as mankind's exit from its self-incurred immaturity, with immaturity understood as the inability to make use of one's own understanding without the guidance of another. Women who shine from within have accomplished precisely this enlightenment, often under social conditions that actively discouraged their independent thought. They have overcome not only external limitations on their autonomy, but also the more insidious forms of self-limitation that occur when oppressive frameworks are internalized. This represents a particular form of courage, the courage to trust one's own understanding even when dominant cultural narratives question women's capacity for rational thought or moral discernment. The motto of enlightenment, according to Kant, is sapere aude, or dare to know. For women, this daring has often required a specific form of bravery, the willingness to know oneself and the world directly, rather than through the mediating lenses of patriarchal frameworks that have historically defined femininity in terms of relation rather than autonomous existence. The woman who shines from within has dared to know herself as a being capable of determining her own moral principles and acting upon them, regardless of whether this autonomy is recognized or validated by external authorities. This knowing is not merely intellectual, but embodied, a felt sense of one's own capacity for moral determination that manifests as a particular quality of presence others experience as inner radiance or quiet authority. What makes this form of strength particularly powerful is its independence from external validation. Because it derives from recognition of one's inherent dignity rather than from position, appearance, or others' approval, it cannot be taken away through conventional means. A woman who has accessed this understanding may be denied formal authority, may age in a culture that devalues older women, may fail to achieve conventional metrics of success, and yet retain intact her sense of herself as a being of inherent worth whose actions have meaning independently of their recognition by others. This creates a particular kind of freedom, the freedom to act according to one's own rational determination of what ought to be done without requiring external permission or validation. The connection between this invisible strength and Kant's concept of respect deserves exploration. For Kant, respect represents our emotional response to the moral law, a feeling that is unique in being both self-produced through rational recognition and independent of self-interest or inclination. Women who manifest the archetype of invisible strength often command a particular kind of respect that operates differently from the deference accorded to conventional forms of authority. This respect arises not from fear, habit, or expectation, but from others' recognition, however unconscious, of a person who embodies moral autonomy. It represents not merely an emotional response to qualities such as kindness or competence, but a recognition of the other as a fully realized moral being whose actions spring from self-determined principles rather than external dictates. The concept of duty plays a central role in understanding how invisible feminine strength operates in practice. For Kant, acting from duty means acting from recognition of the moral law and respect for it, regardless of inclination or self-interest. Women who embody invisible strength have often developed a sophisticated understanding of duty that transcends both blind obedience to external authority and reactive rejection of all obligation. They recognize that true autonomy involves binding oneself to principles determined through one's own rational will, creating a form of self-governance that is neither subservient nor selfishly individualistic. This understanding enables them to fulfill responsibilities to others not from fear, habit, or the desire to please, but from a clear recognition of what moral law requires. This conception of duty provides a framework for addressing one of the central challenges women face in contemporary society: the tension between self-care and care for others. The woman who has accessed invisible strength recognizes that caring for herself represents not selfishness, but a form of duty, a necessary condition for maintaining her capacity for autonomous moral action. Similarly, her care for others springs not primarily from socialized feminine selflessness or fear of disapproval, but from recognition of others' status as ends in themselves, deserving of respect. This reframing transforms the experience of care from potential self-abnegation to the fulfillment of moral duty freely chosen, creating a sustainable foundation for both self-care and care for others that avoids the extremes of selfishness and self-sacrifice. The relationship between invisible feminine strength and time deserves particular attention. In a culture increasingly oriented toward immediate visibility and constant external validation, through social media and other technologies of display, the cultivation of inner qualities that may not bear immediate fruit represents a radical act. Women who shine from within have often developed a different relationship to time, one that recognizes the value of slow internal development that may not yield visible results for years or even decades. This patience derives not from passivity, but from confidence in the value of inner cultivation and trust in one's own capacity for moral growth independently of external validation. It creates a quality of steadiness that others experience as a form of strength, a capacity to remain centered amid cultural currents that increasingly pull toward constant external performance and validation. The particular challenge of maintaining invisible strength in a culture that privileges visibility cannot be overstated. We live in a world increasingly oriented toward metrics, rankings, and quantifiable forms of success. A world in which one's value is often measured by followers, likes, citations, or other visible indicators of impact or influence. Women who maintain their connection to invisible forms of strength amid these pressures perform a particular kind of resistance, reminding us through their presence that the most significant dimensions of human experience cannot be captured through such metrics. Their quiet insistence on valuing what cannot be measured creates space for others to recognize and honor these dimensions in themselves, contributing to the creation of communities that operate according to different principles of valuation. If you've found value in exploring how Kant's philosophy illuminates the nature of invisible feminine strength, please consider subscribing to this channel and becoming part of a community dedicated to making profound philosophical insights accessible to those seeking deeper understanding. When you subscribe, you'll receive weekly reflections that transform seemingly inaccessible concepts into practical wisdom for navigating the unique challenges women face in cultivating and manifesting their inner strength. We aren't merely studying philosophy here. We're learning to recognize and honor forms of power that operate beyond conventional visibility, to question with greater discernment, and to live with deeper purpose. Click the subscribe button, not as an obligation, but as a gift to your own intellectual and spiritual development. And if this content has brought some clarity to your understanding of feminine strength today, please leave a like to signify that we're united in this quest for true wisdom. Remember, understanding Kant's insights into human dignity and autonomy isn't just an academic exercise. It's a pathway to awakening a more conscious and authentic expression of the invisible feminine strength that has always been your birthright. The concept of the sublime in Kant's aesthetic theory offers additional insight into the nature of invisible feminine strength. For Kant, the sublime represents our experience of phenomena so vast or powerful that they initially overwhelm our sensory capacities, creating a moment of psychic disturbance, followed by the recognition of our own transcendent capacity to comprehend what exceeds sensory limitation. Women who manifest invisible strength often possess a particular relationship to the sublime, a capacity to face overwhelming circumstances, whether personal trauma, systemic injustice, or existential uncertainty, and discover within themselves resources of comprehension and resilience that transcend conventional coping mechanisms. This capacity manifests not as stoic endurance, but as a particular quality of presence that others experience as a form of grace under pressure, an ability to maintain moral coherence amid circumstances that might otherwise fragment one's sense of self or purpose. The relationship between invisible feminine strength and Kant's concept of the highest good merits exploration. For Kant, the highest good represents the perfect alignment of virtue and happiness, a state he recognized as unattainable within the limitations of human existence, yet essential as a regulative ideal guiding moral action. Women who shine from within often orient themselves toward this highest good, not through pursuit of conventional happiness, but through commitment to virtue, understood as fidelity to self-determined moral principles. This orientation creates a particular kind of contentment that differs from happiness as usually conceived, a sense of internal coherence and purpose that remains accessible even amid external circumstances that might otherwise preclude conventional happiness. This contentment derives not from achievement or possession, but from the knowledge that one is living in accordance with principles determined through one's own rational will. The quality of judgment exercised by women who manifest invisible strength deserves particular attention. In his Critique of Judgment, Kant explored a form of thinking that operates between the pure reason of his first critique and the practical reason of his second, a capacity for discernment that applies universal principles to particular cases without reducing the complexity of those cases. Women who shine from within have often developed this faculty to an unusual degree, perhaps as a result of navigating social systems in which survival required sophisticated discernment of implicit rules and boundaries. This capacity for nuanced judgment manifests as a particular kind of wisdom, an ability to respond to complex situations with moral clarity while maintaining sensitivity to the unique features of each case. Others experience this wisdom as a form of strength that operates not through rigid application of rules, but through discerning discernment of what moral law requires in each particular circumstance. The relationship between invisible feminine strength and freedom requires examination. For Kant, true freedom consists not in the absence of constraint, but in self-legislation, in giving oneself the law rather than being determined by external forces or internal inclinations. Women who manifest this strength have often achieved a particular kind of freedom within social systems that formerly limited their autonomy, developing the capacity to determine their own principles of action and act upon them regardless of external validation or permission. This freedom manifests not primarily as rebellion against external authority, but as fidelity to self-determined moral principles, creating a quality of internal coherence that others experience as a form of strength operating independently of conventional power structures. As we conclude our exploration of how Kant's philosophy illuminates the archetype of invisible feminine strength, let us recognize that the women who embody this archetype are not merely adapting to limitations imposed by patriarchal systems, but embodying an entirely different conception of power, one that operates not through domination or control, but through the persistent manifestation of moral autonomy. Their strength reminds us that true transformation occurs not primarily through struggle for recognition within existing frameworks of valuation, but through the cultivation and embodiment of alternative forms of valuation that honor human dignity in all its manifestations. The quiet revolution these women enact through their daily presence creates space for all of us to recognize and cultivate the capacity for moral autonomy that constitutes our shared humanity. As we learn to recognize and honor this invisible strength in ourselves and others, we contribute to the creation of communities that operate according to Kant's kingdom of ends, spaces in which each person is valued not for their utility or conformity, but for their inherent dignity as an end in themselves.